Tonight we turn back the clock, way back, to civilization of sun gods, sacred rivers, and stone monuments taller than your apartment block. Ancient Egypt, dazzling on the surface, brutal underneath. It's a land remembered for glittering tombs and golden masks, but if you were an average citizen, life was more sweat and sand than glory and gold. So let's ask the question no museum, brochure dares print. What if you had to live just one day in ancient Egypt? Spoiler, the sun isn't your friend. Before we dive in, settle in. Maybe grab a fan for some atmosphere, you're going to need it. Let the lights dim, breathe deep, and step into a world where your morning alarm is the sun itself, and it doesn't hit snooze. You wake up on a mat that feels like sleeping on shredded baskets, covered by a linen scrap thin enough to question whether it counts as a blanket or a bad joke. There's no window glass, no blinds, just open slats that let the sunlight pour in like it's personally offended you. And the heat, it's not warm, it's aggressive. By the time you open your eyes, the air is already pressing down like a hot towel straight from the gods. The desert isn't just outside, it's in everything. Your home, made of sun-dried mud bricks, is absorbing solar radiation like it's training for war. Your tunic, a wispy little thing made from linen, sure, but it might as well be fog for all the good it does. Sunscreen, dream on. If you're wealthy or working inside a temple, maybe you get fancy oils to keep from turning into a rotisserie chicken. Otherwise, it's mud or crocodile poop. No, really, some folks swore by it. Sunblock and street cred, all in one smelly smear. By the time you stumble outside, it's barely breakfast and the temperature is already flirting with 90 degrees Fahrenheit. And guess what? That's the cool part of the day. There's no shade, trees are scarce, and buildings throw shadows like lazy artists. Even the ground is betraying you. Walk barefoot and your soles will scream. The stones are hot enough to cook legumes. You find the smallest sliver of relief hiding beside a sweating wall, and somehow even that wall seems to resent your presence. Still, complaining, dangerous territory. Ra, the sun god, is watching. And here the hotter it gets, the more powerful he's considered. So your heat stroke, that's basically a divine compliment. If you want to survive the day, it takes hydration, humility, and a high tolerance for feeling like a bread loaf halfway through baking. And this is just the morning. After peeling yourself off the straw mat, you set out toward the Nile. It's your closest thing to a shower. You can already smell it long before it's in view, a pungent cocktail of wet earth, fish guts, and spiritual necessity. The river is everything, the reason cities exist here, the artery of trade, the lifeblood of crops, but it's also kind of gross. Let's be clear, this isn't a sparkling blue oasis. It's more of a glorified swamp with sacred PR. Flies buzz like unpaid interns, frogs hop around like they own the place, and then there are the mystery creatures, things with too many legs and no sense of personal space. Still, it's all you've got. Bathing, in theory, is cleansing. In practice, welcome to sand scrubbing. No soap, no body wash, just handfuls of sand, water, and optimism. Rub hard enough and you'll shed your outer layer and your dignity at the same time. Think of it as skincare via exfoliation and mild trauma. Your laundry's here too. You smack your clothes against rocks, rinse them in the same water people are drinking from, and pray that nothing with teeth decides your tunic looks tasty. There's always the chance of sewage drifting downstream, or worse, upstream if someone upstream is already making questionable choices. It's not a private spa. It's a communal mess shared with families, farmers, ibises, and that one neighbor who still believes in loud morning chanting. And yet you endure. You fill jars, balance them on your head, and trudge home like it's just another Tuesday, because it is. The Nile gives, takes, and mildly poisons, all in one sacred, fetid package. You're cleanish, you've sandpapered your skin, and now it's time for food. Calling it breakfast is generous. It's more like survival rations. Don't expect fresh fruit or poached eggs. You'll squat by a corner or sit on a chipped stool, if you're lucky, and start your day with the ancient Egyptian power duo, bread and beer. The bread, thick, coarse, and baked with love and the occasional rat hair. It's made from emmer wheat or barley and cooked in clay ovens that are barely distinguishable from the surrounding dirt. Bonus texture, sand, lots of it, not on purpose, just collateral damage from grinding grain with stone tools. Every bite gives you carbs and calcium, courtesy of ground-up rock particles. It's like chewing on memories and gravel. And the beer, don't get excited. This isn't a crisp IPA. It's a cloudy, lukewarm, bread-adjacent sludge. Less drink, more meal. Think liquid porridge with a side of fermentation. Kids drink it. Everyone drinks it. Not because it tastes good, but because it's safer than river water, which, as we've covered, is basically a cocktail of bacteria and divine forgiveness. On a really good day, you might get an onion or some dried dates. If a fish was caught and not instantly devoured raw, maybe a sliver of that too. Protein is precious, flavor is theoretical, and the flies. Oh, they're living their best life, swarming your face and food like it's an open-air buffet. You swat, chew, sip, and try not to gag. Breakfast in ancient Egypt isn't about enjoyment. It's about not passing out before noon. And with that, you're ready for work. So you've had your grain bricks, your frothy bread beer, and a face full of flies. Time to roll up your non-existent sleeves. Because in ancient Egypt, work isn't optional, it's your entire reason for existing. And it doesn't come with ergonomic chairs or a union rep. Let's cut to the reality. Unless you're a priest, a scribe, or accidentally born into royalty, your day job is an unending loop of grit, heat, and sweat. No emails. Just endless physical labor and the occasional existential crisis brought on by the sun. If you're a farmer, you're in the fields by sunrise, ankle-deep in Nile mud, yanking weeds or planting crops under the not-so-watchful eye of a man whose main qualifications are yelling and having a stick. You've got basic wooden tools, a bent back, and a daily battle against insects, drought, and whatever spirit is currently mad at your family line. Your plow, wooden your hands, raw your pay. Mostly grain and the knowledge that if your harvest fails, so do your chances of not starving. Now, if you're a laborer, and may the gods pity you, things get monumentally worse. As in, you might literally be helping haul stones the size of small buses to build a tomb that isn't even yours. Imagine dragging multi-ton limestone blocks barefoot across makeshift ramps made of dust, rope, and hope. You fall. That's a crushed leg, maybe worse. You complain, congratulations, you've just insulted the gods and might be reassigned to latrine duty if you're lucky. Working on tombs or temples, that's supposed to be an honor. It's also chipping rock for 12 hours a day in the kind of heat that could boil soup in your skull. You carve burial chambers for people who will sleep longer and softer than you ever will. One mistake, one mischisel on a pharaoh's eternal condo, and you might get promoted to permanent wall filler. And let's not forget the domestic workload, which isn't exactly gentle, especially for women. You're grinding grain, hauling water, weaving linen, scrubbing everything by hand, and raising children at the same time. Oh, and you might still be expected to help out in the fields after all that. Your break is 3 minutes of silence while your baby naps and the goat isn't eating your laundry. There's no clock to punch, no manager handing out feedback forms. The sun is your boss. When it rises, you rise. When it sets, you collapse. There is no such thing as done. There is only less undone. At sunset, you limp home, every joint screaming, every inch of your skin covered in sweat, dust, and the beginnings of another layer of grime that won't come off even if you bathe in the Nile again. You don't rest, you just reset. Work in ancient Egypt isn't a job, it's a life sentence. And heaven forbid you murmur something like, "This seems a bit much," or "Why am I breaking my spine to stack rocks for someone else's afterlife?" Because now we're getting into dangerous territory. See, in Egypt, your supervisor isn't just a person, he's a god, or at least he reports directly to one. The pharaoh, he's not just your ruler, he's the divine embodiment of Horus on earth, a living god. A man chosen by the sun to keep the universe balanced. Literally, he doesn't just sign off on tax rates, he's the glue holding cosmic order together. Or at least, that's what you've been told since you could walk. When the river floods just right and the harvest is good, you thank the pharaoh. When it floods too much or not at all, it's probably your fault for not praying hard enough. Or maybe your neighbor skipped a ritual. Either way, the pharaoh. Not to blame, his image is everywhere. carved into temples, etched onto coins, baked into bread molds. He's depicted in murals 10 times larger than any other figure because obviously he's more important, not metaphorically. Legally, it's the law. He's that tall because he matters more, and you'll likely never see him. Not unless you're standing in a crowd watching his gilded barge glide past during a religious festival. Blink and he's gone, back into the palace, surrounded by scribes and guards and priests, and more gold than your entire village has seen in 3 lifetimes. If you're one of the lucky few selected to build his tomb, or sculpt his likeness, or dig his boat tunnel, congratulations, you're now part of the divine workforce. Smile while you blade, because they've told you this is a sacred honor. Say otherwise, and you might find yourself volunteering for a one-way trip to the underworld via a sealed tomb door and a small mountain of rocks. Rebellion? Nice thought. Here's what happens when people try that. The village is erased. As in, literally, burned down, names removed, records destroyed. History rewinds like you were never there. So yeah, the pharaoh is divine. And you're just another set of hands lucky enough to sweat in his name. By now you're starting to notice something. Actually, you're starting to notice everything in your hair, your ears, your food, your soul. Sand, it's not a feature of life here. It is life. It's in your tunic, your bed, your bread, your everything. You try to brush it off, but it multiplies. Every gust of wind turns into a face slap from nature's exfoliant. It's less natural skincare and more accidental dermabrasion. Let's talk clothing. You're in linen, the ancient equivalent of breathable gym wear. It's light, sure, but useless against sand. The stuff slips through it, clings to your sweat, and nests in places you didn't even know could hold particles. You start to feel like a living hourglass. Eating, you might as well be seasoning your bread with gravel, because thanks to the way grain is ground between slabs of stone, every bite contains a delightful crunch of actual rock. That's not an exaggeration. Archaeologists have looked at ancient Egyptian teeth and found them ground down flat, like river stones. Every meal was a slow dental apocalypse, and your home, no better. Mud brick houses have plenty of charm and zero insulation. No windows, just openings. Openings that let in every grain of airborne sand from the moment the wind picks up. You sweep the floor. 10 seconds later, it's a miniature desert again. Your bedding is dusted. Your food bowls have texture. Your pillow crunches. Footwear is a luxury. Most people go barefoot, not by choice, by cost. If you have sandals, they're made of woven reeds, which do approximately nothing to stop sharp rocks. It's like wrapping your feet in straw and hoping for the best. Good luck. And when the gods are feeling spicy, they toss a sandstorm your way. Walls of wind and grit descend without warning, blinding and choking. You can't see, can't breathe, can't think. Visibility drops to zero, and everyone becomes a coughing shadow. Sand, in Egypt, is more than a setting. It's your coworker, your dinner guest, your worst enemy, and no matter how many times you wash it off, in the blessed, bug-ridden Nile, it always comes back. Religion in ancient Egypt isn't just a part of life, it is life. It's your calendar, your weather app, your health insurance, and your user manual for the afterlife, all rolled into one. Imagine if every time you got a headache, stubbed your toe, or sneezed, you had to apologize to a celestial entity. That's the vibe here. Start your day by thanking Ra for the sun. Spill a bit of beer and hope Hathor doesn't take offense. Say the wrong thing before breakfast, and you might accidentally curse your own cattle. Ancient Egyptian religion is less about belief and more about negotiation, with a pantheon of gods who all have very specific job titles. Ra drives the sun across the sky like he's on a divine Uber shift. Thoth, with an ibis head and an infinite supply of moon calendars, manages knowledge, writing, and cosmic bookkeeping. Sobek, half crocodile, all nightmare, patrols the Nile. Bastet, the cat goddess, handles domestic vibes and pest control, while Set, god of chaos, is the guy you hope never gets invited to the party. Every town has its own temples, every temple its own staff, and every god their own rituals. If you want to keep your crops growing, your children healthy, and your livestock unpossessed, you have to play by their rules, which change depending on which deity you're dealing with. There's no casual faith here. It's devotion or disaster. And even death won't let you off the hook, because in ancient Egypt, dying isn't the end, it's a bureaucratic beginning. First stop, the Hall of Maat. It's Judgment Day, but Egyptian style, which means it's more courtroom drama than fiery damnation. Picture this: your soul stands before a tribunal of 42 gods, and you have to declare your innocence by reciting a list of everything you didn't do. I didn't steal, I didn't lie, I didn't cheat on weights and measures. I definitely didn't covet my neighbor's donkey. Misspeak even one line and you're in trouble. This is the oldest job interview in history, and failing means a lot more than not getting hired, because next comes the feather test. Your heart, which, according to Egyptian belief, contains your entire moral history, is placed on a scale opposite the feather of Maat, the symbol of truth and justice. If your heart is light, you pass. If it's heavy with guilt or regret, you're not going to prison, you're going into non-existence. Enter Ammut, part crocodile, part lion, part hippo, all horror. If your heart fails the test, she doesn't give you a lecture, she eats you. Soul, identity, everything gone. No afterlife, no second chances, just cosmic erasure. You don't even get to haunt anyone, and it gets better. You can doom yourself not only through bad deeds, but through a wrong word during the ritual. Forget a line, mispronounce a name, or mess up your confession, and it's lights out. It's like an open book exam where the stakes are your eternal existence, and the proctor is a hybrid monster with dietary preferences. But if you do pass, congratulations. You've earned entrance to the field of reeds. Think of it as paradise, a glorious, ever-blooming version of Egypt where you can farm without breaking your back, eat without ever going hungry, and sail the Nile forever under a gentle sun that doesn't cook you alive. That's why Egyptians were obsessed with burial rituals. Tombs weren't just grave, they were launch pads for eternity. And the richer you were, the more stuff you buried with you: jewelry, food, statues, perfumes, and of course, the Book of the Dead. Not a horror novel, but a cheat sheet full of spells, prayers, and instructions on how to survive the underworld without getting your essence devoured. Peasants, they had a harder time. No golden masks, no grand murals. Maybe a small pit, a rag-wrapped body, and a pot of beer. But they still held on to hope that if they lived decently and did their part, they might earn that eternal peace too. Because in Egypt, faith isn't a choice. It's your instruction manual, your daily planner, and your last will and testament, written in starlight, judged in feathers, and sealed in stone. And speaking of stone, let's say you didn't die just yet. You're still walking around, but now you've stepped on something sharp, gotten bit by something cursed, or caught one of those mysterious ancient illnesses that we now know as everything. Time for medical help. Good luck. Egyptian medicine is a wild mix of herbal remedies, real surgical practices, and magical thinking held together with prayers and crushed garlic. Doctors in ancient Egypt were actually ahead of their time in many ways. They had surgical instruments, they had medical texts, they knew how to set bones, drain abscesses, and stitch wounds. But, and this is important, every single procedure was done with a side of sorcery. Your healer might give you a honey and herb paste, which sounds reasonable. Honey is antibacterial. Some herbs were genuinely effective, but before anything touches your wound, they'll recite a protective spell. Why? Because your stomachache might not be indigestion. It might be a ghost having a tantrum inside your spleen. Got a headache? The prescription could involve onion paste massaged into your scalp while someone chants in honor of Thoth. Respiratory infection? Burn herbs and inhale, or maybe inhale beetle smoke and smear lizard goo on your chest. There's a line between holistic care and creative terror, and Egypt danced on it daily. Eye infection. Time for a red ochre and crocodile bile cocktail with beer, because apparently everything went better with beer. If it's serious enough for surgery, brace yourself. You're getting cut open with sharp flint or copper, stitched with linen thread, and numbed only by prayer and screaming. Anesthesia, bite down on a stick and scream into a pillow made of dirt. You'll live or you won't. Dentistry, a nightmare. All that sand in the bread means most people's teeth are ground down to nubs by their 20s. Infected tooth. Your options are limited. live with it, die from it, or have it yanked out with pliers that were last cleaned. Never. And through it all, you're surrounded by charms, talismans, and amulets, because maybe the infection isn't bacteria, maybe it's divine punishment for skipping temple last week. Whatever the real cause, your best treatment plan is 40% science, 60% supernatural defense, and 100% hoping the gods like you today. Medicine in ancient Egypt is impressive until you're the one bleeding. If you think all ancient societies treated women like background props, ancient Egypt might surprise you. On paper, Egyptian women had rights that wouldn't show up again for thousands of years. They could own property, run businesses, file for divorce, inherit wealth, and even sue someone in court. Sounds shockingly modern, right? But hold off on booking your time travel tickets for a girl boss getaway. Because while Egyptian law may have recognized women as legal adults, daily life still had zero chill. Let's say you're a woman in ancient Egypt. Your day starts before the sun. Not for yoga or journaling, but for grinding grain on a stone slab big enough to double as an ancient torture device. The motion wrecks your spine, wrecks your arms, and fills your hair with dust before you've even had your warm beer. Then it's time to haul water from the Nile, the same river everyone bathes in, drinks from, dumps in, and occasionally dies near. You carry heavy clay jars balanced on your head like it's just another Tuesday. Then it's cooking breakfast, feeding kids, mending tunics, cleaning the house, feeding livestock, maybe helping in the fields, all before midday. You are not lounging. You are not reclining on silk cushions being fed dates by a slave with palm fronds. You are essentially a one-woman workforce with no weekends and zero PTO. You're exhausted, sweaty, bitten by bugs, and still somehow expected to be cheerful about it. And childbirth, that's not a gentle, candlelit event. It's a chaotic, no anesthesia screamfest. Midwives help, sure, but there's no disinfectant, no surgical backup, no relaxing harp playlist. You give birth in a stifling hot room filled with incense and prayers and the hope that you or your baby don't bleed out. Want fashion. You get linen, always linen. Light, breathable, and identical to what every other woman is wearing. There's no underwear, no shoes. The sun scorches your skin, the sand invades everything, and the bugs treat you like an open buffet. If you want makeup, you can have it, in the form of thick, lead-based eyeliner that's equal parts glam and eye infection waiting to happen. Now, if you're lucky, born into a wealthy family, things look a little brighter. You might learn to read and write, manage estates, or serve in temple roles. Some women even rose to true power. Queen Hatshepsut ruled as pharaoh, complete with fake beard and all. Cleopatra ran a kingdom, held her own with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, and still found time to become a symbol of seductive intelligence for eternity. But most women, you're not Cleopatra, you're not Hatshepsut. You're somewhere between barefoot and busy. Yes, the law respects your right to inherit property, but no one's handing you a mansion. You can sue someone, sure, if you can get to court, find a scribe, and not starve in the process. You have rights, but rights don't carry water jars, change diapers, or keep you from dying in childbirth. Still, compared to many ancient civilizations, Greece, Rome, even medieval Europe, Egyptian women had more legal autonomy and personal agency. You weren't your husband's property. You could divorce him. You could keep your stuff. That's more than most women could say for the next 2,000 years. So yes, ancient Egyptian women had rights, but comfort. That was reserved for statues and goddesses, not the woman elbow deep in dough while swatting flies off a screaming toddler. But maybe, just maybe, you've made it through another day. Your chores are done, your feet hurt, your linen is clinging to your sweat-soaked back, and you're ready to collapse. Bad news, you don't get to rest yet, because in ancient Egypt, the end of life isn't rest, it's paperwork. Soul-judging, feather-weighing, monster-dodging bureaucracy of the afterlife. Let's say you died today. Congratulations, time to face a multi-phase metaphysical obstacle course. Your soul embarks on a long journey through the underworld, called the duat, filled with gates, guardians, riddles, and dangers that read like something between Dante's Inferno and a very high-stakes escape room. the main event. That courtroom we mentioned earlier, the Hall of Maat. There you stand before a tribunal of divine auditors and recite the negative confession, basically a list of crimes you didn't commit. It's not "I was a good person." It's "I didn't steal, didn't kill, didn't cheat at marketplace scales, didn't whisper mean things about the gods." Mess it up and you're toast. After the oral exam comes the feather test. Your heart goes on a scale against the feather of Maat. Pass, and your soul earns access to the field of reeds, a paradise that looks suspiciously like a fantasy version of Egypt, only without the scorching heat and unpaid labor. Fail. You get devoured by Ammut, the soul-eating goddess mashup. And when we say devoured, we mean erased. Gone, your essence consumed, your name forgotten. In a culture obsessed with eternity, that's the worst fate imaginable. This fear is why the tomb industry in Egypt is basically its own economy. Rich Egyptians start preparing for death while still in their 20s. Tombs are commissioned, artisans hired, spells gathered, and grave goods stockpiled. You're not just planning for the afterlife, you're investing in it. You get buried with food, beer, figurines, cosmetics, furniture, and even tiny magical servant dolls called shabtis, designed to do your chores in the afterlife. They're like divine interns with zero HR protections. Your body is embalmed, wrapped, perfumed, stuffed with natron salts, and tucked into a sarcophagus decorated with protective prayers and Instagram-worthy design. You're placed in a tomb loaded with goods, maybe with a full copy of the Book of the Dead, not an actual book, but a sacred guide full of spells, maps, and tips on not getting eaten by shadow demons. And if you're poor, well, your afterlife prep is more modest. A shallow grave, a ragged linen wrap, a beer jar if your family can spare one. But even then, the dream persists that you'll pass the tests, reach the field of reeds, and finally rest. Because in ancient Egypt, death isn't a door closing, it's a test beginning. And the final grade, eternity. So you've died. Your soul passed the feather test, you dodged the soul-devouring demon, and now you're finally at peace in the field of reeds, an eternal paradise of calm rivers, endless crops, and never having to haul mud bricks again. Or so you thought. Because while your soul may be drifting blissfully in the next world, your body, the one painstakingly embalmed, wrapped, and buried with enough grave goods to stock a small boutique, is still in this one. And it's in trouble. Because in ancient Egypt, tombs weren't just final resting places. They were treasure chests with do not disturb signs that no one ever obeyed. Your grave, whether it's a humble sand pit or a full-blown golden suite carved into a mountain, is a massive target. You're packed in with perfumes, jewelry, food, statues, charms, and for the elite, literal piles of gold. To you, it's all sacred. To someone with a chisel and a hunger problem, it's inventory. Tomb robbery wasn't just a side hustle, it was a full-blown profession. And it started shockingly early. Pharaohs knew this. That's why royal tombs were built deep into cliffs, hidden behind false doors, booby traps, and curses scrawled on the walls in full spooky script. May your soul be devoured by serpents. May 1,000 scorpions dance in your underwear. May a crocodile eat your face while your heart gets rejected at judgment. Nice sentiments, they didn't work. Because grave robbers came anyway, quietly, strategically, often with help from inside. Some robbers were desperate villagers. Some were laborers who had helped build the tombs and knew exactly where the best loot was buried. Occasionally, even priests and guards, the very people paid to protect the dead, would pocket valuables on the sly. The temptation was too great, the economy too brutal, and the dead, well, they weren't known for fighting back. When caught, punishment was severe. Think public beatings, mutilation, exile, or execution. But when food is scarce and your family is starving, a dead man's necklace starts to look less like sacred treasure and more like lunch money. And the looting didn't stop with the rich. Even the grave of commoners were targeted. A pot of beer, a loaf of bread, a piece of linen cloth, all were worth stealing. These weren't luxury items, they were survival supplies. When the Nile fails, and crops don't grow, and your children cry from hunger, that burial offering isn't holy. It's dinner. Some tombs were looted just days after burial. Others sat untouched for centuries, before someone finally pried open the stone lid and made off with whatever hadn't rotted or rusted. And sometimes, the robbery wasn't even about the goods. It was about revenge or politics. To erase someone's name, to destroy their memory, was to condemn them to spiritual death. Scratch out a person's name from their tomb wall, and you've basically cancelled their afterlife. It's identity theft, but cosmic. And if you were a pharaoh, that fate was always lurking. Lose favor, anger the wrong people, get replaced by a rival dynasty, and suddenly your face gets chiseled off every statue, your name removed from every cartouche, your glorious tomb defaced, forgotten, looted, and sealed again like you never existed. All those golden masks, stolen, all that careful planning, undone by someone with a crowbar and an empty stomach. That's why so few royal tombs were ever found intact. Most of them had already been cracked open and emptied long before archaeologists arrived with flashlights and notebooks. Even Tutankhamun's tomb, the famous, untouched burial that sparked global Egyptomania, had been broken into multiple times in antiquity. The looters just didn't get everything. So yes, ancient Egyptians believed in eternity. But they also knew eternity was vulnerable, that the afterlife was sacred but not safe. Rest in peace, only if no one finds you. You've seen them before, carved into tomb walls, temple facades, and museum gift shop magnets. Little birds, eyes, snakes, and humans walking sideways like they're in an interpretive dance recital. Hieroglyphs, visually stunning, linguistically confusing, spiritually loaded, but don't be fooled by the aesthetic. These weren't just artistic doodles. Hieroglyphs were a full-blown writing system, complicated, sacred, and not meant for just anyone to understand. There were over 700 symbols, and that's just the conservative estimate. Some signs represented entire words. Others were phonetic sounds. Then there were determinatives, little helper symbols that clarified what the word meant, because ancient Egyptians didn't believe in keeping it simple. Want to write the word for star? You might use the actual star symbol or combine a few phonetic sounds with a star-shaped determinative just to make sure nobody confuses it with crab or divine umbrella. Oh, and forget punctuation. Or vowels or spaces. Egyptian writing was basically one very stylish run-on sentence. Good luck figuring out where one thought ends and another begins. And direction, that's a guessing game. Hieroglyphs could be written left to right to left, or top to bottom. The only clue, which way the little people and animals are facing. If the ducks face left, read left. If they face right, read right. If they face each other, you're on your own. Learning to read this system wasn't a hobby, it was a lifestyle. Literacy was rare, maybe 1% of the population could read and write. If you wanted in, you had to become a scribe. And that meant starting as a child, memorizing hundreds of symbols, copying texts for years, and possibly developing hand cramps so permanent your fingers resembled bent reeds. But if you made it, you became part of an elite group. Scribes were essential to the economy, the government, the temples, the afterlife. They wrote tax records, land surveys, medical texts, prayers, legal documents, love letters, and spell books. And because knowledge was power, scribes were usually exempt from hard labor. You didn't haul bricks, you moved the world with ink. And the ink, made from ground minerals mixed with water and applied using thin brushes or reed pens. Writing was done on papyrus, the OG paper, or carved painstakingly into limestone. And when you messed up, there was no backspace, just a chisel and regret. For the rest of the population, hieroglyphs weren't just writing. They were magic, literal magic. Writing someone's name preserved their soul, erasing it condemned them to spiritual extinction. That's why tomb robbers who scraped names off sarcophagi weren't just stealing, they were erasing existence. Hieroglyphs were sacred. To carve them was to conjure. To read them was to invoke. They turned stories into spells, names into eternity, and prayers into cosmic contracts. Every temple inscription, every funerary mural, every tiny carved amulet was a message, not just to humans, but to the gods. So while they might look like ancient emojis, hieroglyphs were closer to a cosmic operating system, one that ran a civilization for over 3,000 years. And unless you were trained from childhood, you'd never be able to crack the code. But don't feel bad. Most Egyptians couldn't read them either. So after everything, the sun, the sand, the gods, the grinding labor, the questionable bread, it's time to ask the big question. Would you, modern comfort-loving, coffee-dependent, indoor plumbing appreciating human, survive a single day in ancient Egypt? Let's be honest, probably not. It's easy to romanticize the past. Golden tombs, sacred rituals, divine architecture that's still standing after thousands of years. The pyramids, the eyeliner, the linen, but behind all that grandeur was a daily reality so brutal it would chew up most people by lunchtime. Your day starts with heat that hits like a punch. You're sleeping on a scratchy mat under a roof made of reeds, in a room with no windows, no breeze, and absolutely no insulation. Flies are everywhere. Smoke from the cooking fire lingers in the air. Livestock might be walking around your legs. This isn't some filtered Instagram version of ancient living. This is survival with sand in your teeth. There's no running water, no toilets, no toothpaste, no soap, no painkillers. You walk barefoot, carry everything on your head, and work until your muscles stop cooperating. Your diet is 95% bread and beer, and both come with a bonus serving of grit. There's no sick day. If you catch something, and let's be real, you probably will, your options are honey, onion paste, or a priest with a spell and a strong sense of optimism. No antibiotics. No surgery unless you cut it open and hope for the best. Your work, it's either physical labor from dawn until dusk, or domestic work that somehow feels even more endless. Hauling, grinding, weaving, lifting, fetching, cleaning, carving, praying. There's no end to it. There's only exhaustion and the knowledge that if you fall behind, you fall completely. Social mobility doesn't exist. You're born into your class and there you stay. No promotions, no career changes, no new beginnings. You are what you are, a laborer, a mother, a farmer, a servant, until you're not, which is usually around age 35. That's right, most people didn't live much longer than that. Childhood diseases, childbirth complications, infections, animal attacks, dehydration, starvation, and the occasional divine punishment all had their turn. If you made it to old age, you were either incredibly lucky, incredibly rich, or both. And even if you do everything right, pray daily, serve your pharaoh, feed the gods, obey the social order, respect your ancestors, you still might get your afterlife yanked away by a tomb robber with a shovel and no chill. But here's the twist. For all of that, the heat, the hardship, the hierarchy, the ancient Egyptians didn't seem miserable. In fact, they seemed proud, committed, joyful, even. They believed deeply in their purpose. They held tight to their gods. They built, created, danced, sang, prayed, painted, and planned for eternity like it was guaranteed. They worshipped beauty. They honored death. They saw themselves as part of a cosmic cycle where every stone mattered, every ritual echoed, and every person played a role in keeping the world balanced. They built monuments so precise that modern engineers still debate how they did it. They created an art style so iconic we recognize it instantly. They imagined the afterlife in vivid detail and lived every day preparing for it. Would you survive a day in their world? Not a chance. But they survived for thousands of years in theirs. And maybe that's why, thousands of years later, we're still talking about them. Because they did the impossible, they made eternity feel real. Deep in the heart of ancient Mesoamerica stands a temple that doesn't ask to be admired. It demands to be feared. Unlike Egypt's grand pyramids or Greece's elegant temples, this one doesn't lift your soul skyward. It drags your gaze to the earth, where serpents slither and blood soaks into stone. Welcome to Teotihuacan, and at its center, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. On the surface, it's a marvel, ornate, symmetrical, massive. Its facade is decorated with dozens of stone serpent heads, mouths open mid-snarl, eyes wide, fangs bared. They jut out from the temple like they're lunging at you. And in a way, they are. This wasn't a building meant to inspire peace. This was intimidation carved in stone, a warning dressed as worship. And what lay beneath? That's where it gets disturbing. For decades, archaeologists dug carefully into the foundation, expecting the usual offerings, shells, jade, figurines. What they found instead stopped them cold. Over 200 human bodies, bound, decapitated, arranged with ritualistic precision. These weren't victims of war hastily dumped. They were offerings, warriors likely. Young men buried in groups, their hands tied behind their backs, obsidian knives nearby. Some wore necklaces made from human jawbones, others had ornaments crafted from teeth. This wasn't murder, this was choreography, and it wasn't hidden. It was built into the foundation, because the Temple of the Feathered Serpent wasn't just a religious site. It was a cosmic engine designed to keep the universe in motion through blood. The logic was terrifyingly simple. To maintain balance, the gods required nourishment, and not in the metaphorical, light a candle sense. They needed life, human life, and Teotihuacan's rulers delivered. This wasn't chaos, this was ritual. And if you're wondering what kind of belief system demands this level of sacrifice, the answer is layered in mystery, because despite the scale of the city, we still don't know who built it. That's right. Teotihuacan was once one of the largest cities in the world, over 100,000 people, sprawling avenues, multi-story housing, and massive pyramids. Yet the name of its builders, unknown, no king lists, no carved biographies, just monuments, just echoes. The name we use, Teotihuacan, was given centuries later by the Aztecs. It means the place where gods were born. Fitting, since the entire city seems built to reflect the cosmos. Streets aligned with celestial bodies, temples designed as star maps, and at the center, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, both a symbol and a threat. Because when you walked up to this structure, you weren't just visiting a shrine. You were standing in front of a god with feathers and fangs, a being that moved between sky and earth, life and death, order and chaos. And behind every carved serpent, under every platform, beneath every ritual fire pit, there was blood, and bone, and silence, because the serpent didn't just watch, it remembered. Let's pull back from the temple, step off the blood-stained stones, zoom out, because Teotihuacan wasn't just a city with one terrifying monument. It was a metropolis, vast, complex, and eerily silent. At its peak, Teotihuacan may have been the sixth largest city in the world. That's right, while Rome was flexing its marble muscles and China was laying down dynasties, Teotihuacan was quietly assembling a city of over 100,000 people in the heart of Mesoamerica. Streets laid out on a grid, apartment complexes, drainage systems, avenues wide enough to impress modern urban planners, and yet no names, no kings, no written histories. Imagine a New York or Beijing of the ancient world and not knowing who ran it. There are no statues of great rulers, no royal tombs, no inscriptions saying, "This was built by so-and-so in the third year of his glorious reign." Instead, we are left with buildings and questions. What kind of power builds a city this size, filled with pyramids, palaces, and temples, and then erases itself? The architecture tells us something strange. This was a city designed not to glorify a single person, but an idea. A cosmic order, a state-level machine focused on ritual, not ego. The city was laid out in accordance with celestial alignments, perfectly calibrated with sunrises, equinoxes, and star patterns. Urban planning as divine choreography, and the Pyramid of the Sun, one of the largest structures ever built in the ancient world, was at its heart. It's not just a monument, it's a mountain of meaning. Built without metal tools, wheels, or beasts of burden, just human will, and thousands of laborers dragging stones into the sky for reasons we still don't fully understand. And yet, as impressive as all this is, what really shocks archaeologists isn't the scale, it's the silence. Teotihuacan left behind no known writing system, no personal records, no shopping lists, just murals and artifacts and the occasional burned offering. It's like a civilization that deliberately refused to sign its name. Even their apartments, yes, apartments, are strange. Multi-family compounds, shared kitchens, neighborhood temples, socially engineered housing before that was even a phrase. Some were decorated with intricate murals. Others showed signs of manufacturing, obsidian blades, pottery, trade goods. Teotihuacan wasn't just spiritually advanced, it was economically booming. And speaking of trade, they weren't isolated. Their influence reached far and wide. Teotihuacan pottery shows up across Mesoamerica. Art styles, architecture, even city layouts in far-off regions bear its mark. They didn't conquer by war, they conquered by culture. But power leaves shadows. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of violent regime change, a wave of destruction that swept through the city's ceremonial core around 550 CE. Temples burned, statues smashed, symbols of authority erased, not by outside invaders, from the inside. It's as if the people, or perhaps factions within the elite, rose up, turned on their own gods, and set fire to the state religion. A cleansing by flame. After that, the city declined. Slowly, quietly, people left. Buildings crumbled. Jungle and dust took over. And by the time the Aztecs arrived centuries later, Teotihuacan was already a ruin, mysterious, powerful, sacred. They treated it like a holy site, gave it its current name, rebuilt parts, worshipped at its pyramids, but even they didn't know who had come before. They called it the place where gods were born, because what else could explain it? A city without rulers, a religion without mercy, a monument built from the bones of warriors, and then silence. That's Teotihuacan, not forgotten, just unsolved. If ancient cities were characters, Angkor would be the quiet genius in the back of the room, the one who doesn't say much, but casually builds a water empire big enough to keep an entire civilization alive through monsoons, droughts, and war. Nestled in the dense forests of what is now Cambodia, Angkor wasn't just a city. It was a sprawling, living machine, a metropolis of temples and reservoirs, canals and causeways, all humming together under the weight of a god-king's vision. And at its peak, it was the largest pre-industrial city on Earth. Yes, bigger than Rome, bigger than Tenochtitlan, a megacity in the jungle, fed not by trade routes or riverbanks, but by an obsession with water. Because in Angkor, water wasn't just for drinking or bathing. It was power, it was politics, it was survival. Every drop was orchestrated. The monsoon rains came hard and fast, months of torrential downpour followed by scorching dry spells. Most civilizations would call this difficult. Angkor called it an opportunity. They built barrays, enormous artificial reservoirs that could swallow entire towns. Each one was the size of a small lake, rimmed with dikes and lined with stone. Water was captured, stored, and then channeled through an intricate network of moats, canals, and spillways. Too much rain, divert it. Too little, release reserves. Rice paddies flourished. Floods were managed. Droughts defanged. It was hydraulic engineering so advanced, modern scientists are still figuring out how it worked. And towering above it all was Angkor Wat, the jewel of the Khmer Empire. The largest religious monument in the world, built not just for worship, but to embody cosmic order. This wasn't just architecture, it was theology in stone. The temple complex is laid out like a miniature universe. Its central tower represents Mount Meru, the mythical axis of the cosmos. Surrounding galleries form the mountain ranges. The moat, that's the celestial ocean. Every corridor, every carving, every courtyard reflects a spiritual truth turned into geometry. And if that's not enough to impress you, remember this. Angkor Wat was built in the 12th century. No bulldozers, no cranes, just sheer manpower, elephants, and divine conviction. Over 5 million tons of sandstone were hauled from quarries miles away, floated down rivers, and snapped into place with impossible precision. But Angkor wasn't a one-temple wonder. It was a city of temples. Dozens of them, each with their own quirks, their own deities, their own silent stories. There's Bayon, a temple where giant stone faces smile down at you from every direction, serene and unnerving at once. There's Ta Prohm, left mostly unrestored, where banyan trees strangle towers in a slow-motion battle between nature and stone. There's Pre Khan, Banti, Esrei, Neek Peen, each one a masterpiece, each one humming with faded chants and ghosted incense. And behind all of this, an empire ruled by kings who weren't just men, they were gods on earth. Divarajas, or god-kings, who merged the divine and the political. Their word was law, their touch was sacred. Their image was carved in stone for eternity. But Angkor's genius was also its Achilles heel. because water, their greatest strength, eventually turned on them. The climate shifted. The monsoons grew unpredictable. Reservoirs dried. Canals clogged. The delicate hydraulic ballet faltered. Crops failed. Famines came, and then so did invaders. The city didn't fall in flames, it faded. Slowly, systems broke. Populations shrank. The jungle crept in, root by root. And one day, Angkor wasn't a city anymore. Just ruins wrapped in vines, waiting to be rediscovered. Centuries later, French explorers stumbled upon it and couldn't believe what they saw. Giant stone towers in the middle of nowhere. Bas-reliefs of battles, gods, and dancers. A forgotten empire hiding in plain sight. Angkor wasn't just lost. It had been swallowed by time and spit back out with vines in its hair and moss on its bones. But it never stopped watching. The temples remain, the reservoirs still catch rain, and the stone faces of Bayon still smile that strange, knowing smile. Because Angkor, like Egypt, like Teotihuacan, wasn't built to vanish. It was built to endure, and it did. High in the Andes, where the air gets thin and the mountains rise like jagged gods, the Inca built an empire on the edge of the impossible. It was vast, stretching over 2,500 miles from modern-day Colombia down to Chile. That's about the same length as the eastern United States, and they controlled it all without horses, without wheels, and without writing anything down. Welcome to Tawantinsuyu, the four parts together, the Inca Empire. This wasn't just a kingdom, it was a machine run on discipline, order, and legs, lots and lots of legs, because while they didn't have carts or chariots, they had runners, thousands of them. Human messengers known as chasquis, trained to sprint up and down the spine of South America, carrying knotted string and state secrets. Let's start there with the quipu. This was the Inca version of a filing system. No parchment, no hieroglyphs, just strings dyed, knotted, and hung from a central cord like a macrame tax return. The knots represented numbers, the colors meant categories, and together they formed a language only the trained could read. Tax records, census data, harvest reports, all encoded in fiber. It was genius and deeply confusing. Modern scholars still haven't cracked it. Imagine trying to understand a civilization's history by analyzing a tangle of shoelaces. But somehow it worked. The state knew who owed what, who lived where, and how many llamas were available for wool duty at any given moment. Speaking of llamas, that was your transport, that and your own 2 feet. Because while they didn't invent the wheel, the Inca did invent one of the most sophisticated road systems in history, the Quhapacnian, a web of highways and mountain trails that spanned over 25,000 miles. Built across cliffs, rivers, deserts, and snowy peaks. With staircases carved into rock, rope bridges slung over yawning chasms, and tunnels punched through the Andes like nature was just another thing to organize. There were no signs, no mile markers, just relay runners at rest stations waiting to dash the next leg. Some could cover 150 miles a day, faster than a Roman courier on horseback. Messages traveled with astonishing speed, crossing the empire in days, powered entirely by foot, stamina, and coca leaves. And who did all this building? The people, not as slaves, but through a labor tax system called mitta. Everyone owed the state service. One year you might farm state lands. The next, you're helping haul stones up a mountainside to build a temple or fortress. It was mandatory, but it wasn't unpaid. The state fed you, clothed you, even threw feasts for workers. And in return, the Inca got cities, canals, terraced fields, and highways that made Rome look like a quaint country lane. Which brings us to their real masterpiece, Machu Picchu. Perched nearly 8,000 feet above sea level, it wasn't even known to the Spanish, which is probably why it survived. This wasn't just a retreat or a palace. It was a marvel of engineering and foresight. Buildings aligned with the solstices, drainage systems that still work today, stones carved so precisely they fit together without mortar, tight enough to survive earthquakes that shattered modern buildings centuries later. And all of this in a place where most people need oxygen tanks just to hike. But the Inca didn't just conquer mountains, they tamed them. Agriculture, they built terraces that hugged the hillsides, turning vertical cliffs into stair-stepped farms. Each level had its own microclimate. You could grow potatoes on one rung and maize on the next. Water was channeled precisely, no floods, no waste. Storage, they carved kolkas, refrigerated warehouses, into the mountainside. Cold air and elevation preserved surplus food for years. It was a logistical miracle. They didn't have money, they didn't need it. The empire worked on reciprocity. You gave labor. The state gave protection, food, festivals. Local communities managed their own affairs, but everything flowed up to the emperor, the Sapa Inca, believed to be the son of the sun itself. And when he walked through the streets of Cusco, the capital, nobles averted their eyes. Servants swept the ground before his feet. His face was too sacred to look at. His word was law. His blood was divine. But even divine blood can't stop bullets. In 1532, Spanish conquistadors arrived, armed with steel, horses, guns, and smallpox. The Inca were in the middle of a brutal civil war. Their emperor had just died, and into the chaos marched Francisco Pizarro. The rest, you know. Within a few short years, one of the most sophisticated civilizations on Earth was dismantled. Temples looted, records lost, cities burned, and those incredible roads, marched by strangers, but the mountains remember, the stones are still there. The terraces still catch rain, the walls still stand, locked tight, unmoved by time or tremors. The Inca may have fallen, but their empire still holds its breath in the Andes, watching, waiting. When you think of ancient cities, North America probably isn't the first place that comes to mind, but it should be. Because long before skyscrapers and superhighways, before the US even had a name, there was Cahokia, a city of earth, wood, and fire. And for a brief, brilliant moment, it was the biggest thing on the continent. Located near present-day St. Louis, right where the Mississippi and Missouri rivers meet, Cahokia rose from the floodplains like a wooden version of Babylon. At its peak, around 1100 CE, it had more people than London. Over 20,000 residents, massive plazas, defensive walls, a bustling economy, and in the center of it all, a pyramid, not stone, earth. Monk's Mound still stands today, 100 feet tall, the largest pre-Columbian earthwork north of Mexico. Built by hand, tens of thousands of workers hauling basket after basket of dirt. Layered, sculpted, packed down like a terraced wedding cake big enough to host gods. And that's exactly what it was for. Because Cahokia wasn't just a city, it was a spiritual machine, a place of ceremony, ritual, and power. The entire layout was precise, aligned to solstices, equinoxes, and lunar events. They even had a solar calendar made of giant wooden posts. Woodhenge, stand in the center, watch the sun rise through specific gaps in the ring of timbers, and you could mark the seasons. Time, tracked in shadows and silence. But Cahokia wasn't just about sunrises and symbolism. It was a living, breathing capital. People came from hundreds of miles away, from the Great Lakes, from the Gulf Coast, from the Rockies, pilgrims, traders, warriors. The city was a crossroads of cultures, a melting pot long before the phrase existed. Pottery styles from distant tribes show up here. So do shells from the ocean and copper from far-off mines. It was cosmopolitan, diverse, alive, but it was also intense. In the middle of the city was a massive plaza, and near it, burial mounds, and in those mounds, evidence that things got dark. One burial site contained a man buried on a platform of shells, surrounded by lavish offerings, clearly someone powerful. But nearby, more than 50 women, all young, all likely sacrificed, buried in rows. Stacked in layers, this wasn't random, this was orchestrated. Another grave had bodies with signs of trauma, ribs snapped, skulls smashed, hands removed. Human sacrifice wasn't just part of the ritual structure, it was the structure. Blood and ceremony went hand in hand, and no one really knows why, because Cahokia left no written records, just soil, bones, and artifacts. Theories swirl, elite families ruling through fear, cosmic events demanding blood. Social order kept in check by spectacle and sacred violence. We don't know, we might never know, but what we do know is this: Cahokia rose fast, and it fell faster. Around 1300 CE, something changed. People started leaving, the city emptied out, the plazas fell silent, The mounds overgrew. Within a few generations, it was gone. No war, no conquest, just disappearance, climate change, possibly. A massive drought around that time hit the entire region. Political unrest, disease, overpopulation, ecological collapse, all of the above. Whatever the reason, Cahokia faded. The wooden walls rotted. The great mounds eroded. And the city that once rivaled the population of Europe's capitals became a rumor in the dirt. By the time Europeans arrived, the descendants of Cahokia's builders had scattered. The city was long gone. The forest had taken back what was hers, but the land remembered. Even today, Monk's Mound looms. You can climb it. You can stand where rulers once stood, looking out across fields where tens of thousands once lived, prayed, built, sacrificed. And if you stand there long enough, you might feel it. The hum of a forgotten city, a pulse buried in the soil, a reminder that North America had civilizations long before the ships came. Cahokia wasn't a fluke, it was a masterpiece. And like all masterpieces, it ended, but not without leaving a mark. Ancient Japan doesn't announce itself with size. It doesn't tower like Egypt's pyramids or stretch like Inca highways. It whispers, it waits, it balances. This is a civilization that carved its identity not in monuments, but in silence, in seasons, in steel. Here the rice grows in neat rows. The cherry blossoms bloom and vanish in a breath. The gods aren't loud, and neither is history. But don't mistake quiet for weakness, because behind the serene shrines and paper walls is a society honed like a sword, precise, disciplined, and ready to cut deep. Let's begin with the kami, the spirits. Shinto, Japan's indigenous faith, doesn't have prophets or commandments. It has presence. Every mountain, river, tree, and breeze can house a kami. These aren't gods in the Western sense. They're forces of nature, of place, of meaning. Some protect, some demand, some just are. There's no scripture, no heaven or hell, just a world charged with the sacred, a world you can offend by stepping wrong. So everything in ancient Japan, architecture, art, behavior, is designed to maintain harmony. Even the buildings reflect it. Temples and homes are built with wood, not stone. They blend with the landscape. They change, rot, get rebuilt. Permanence isn't the goal, grace is. And in the middle of this delicate ecosystem of gods and grain sits the emperor, technically divine, spiritually descended from Amaterasu, the sun goddess, politically often irrelevant. Because for much of Japan's ancient and medieval history, real power didn't sit on a throne. It sat in armor, with a sword. Enter the samurai. They weren't born legendary. Originally, samurai just meant those who serve, rural enforcers, muscle for the landowning elites. But over centuries, they evolved into a warrior class, into an ideal, into myth. What made a samurai wasn't just how well they fought, it was how they lived and how they died. The Bushido, the way of the warrior, wasn't just a code. It was a lifestyle carved from loyalty, austerity, and the looming shadow of death. Honor above all, to serve one's lord with absolute fidelity, to meet death with calm, to kill with precision, to die with meaning. If a samurai failed in duty, shame followed. And with shame came the ultimate act of atonement. Seppuku, ritual suicide, not as punishment, but as restoration. A final, bloody signature of integrity, and the tool of that honor, the katana, more than a weapon, a soul. Forged through heat, folding, and time, each blade was a fusion of science and spirituality. Hard steel for the edge, soft steel for the spine, a curve born from tension, a polish that could reflect a leaf falling, a cut so clean it could divide bamboo in silence. Samurai trained endlessly, not just in combat, but in poetry, calligraphy, meditation, because a true warrior had to master himself before mastering the sword. Violence was always the last resort, but if drawn, the blade had to taste blood. It was a sacred pact. Still, the samurai didn't exist in a vacuum. They were part of a larger world of shifting clans, court intrigue, and ceaseless war. During the Heian period, 794–1185, Japan's imperial court basked in elegance. Aristocrats pennied love poems on scented paper. Women wore 12-layered kimonos. A single glance could be a paragraph of flirting. It was an age of refinement and of fragile power. Because while nobles were busy debating moonlight metaphors, regional lords, daimyos, were building private armies. And when the balance tipped, the samurai didn't serve the court. They served whoever held the rice and the right to command. Then came the Genpei War, samurai against samurai, Minamoto against Taira, brother against brother. And when the dust settled, Japan had a new ruler, a shogun. The emperor still reigned symbolically, but the shogunate ruled, a military government led by warlords, enforced by the blade, and sustained by the loyalty of men trained to kill without hesitation. And yet Japan never lost its poetry. Even in war, letters were written. Even in armor, flowers were admired. Even in death, form mattered. There's a story of a samurai who, moments before battle, composed a death poem. One line, perfect and final, like the stroke of a blade. Because in ancient Japan, beauty and brutality weren't opposites. They were partners, walking side by side through foggy pine forests, past quiet shrines, toward inevitable ends. Honor was everything, and when the sword was drawn, it was not for glory, it was for balance.